Hey everybody, welcome to your Wednesday edition of the Daily Frame. That's right, we are on every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and I'm your host, Big Daddy Liberty. Now remember, I'm not alone, I'm never alone on the show. I've got a wonderful panel with me today, a smaller panel, yes, but just as much an impactful one nonetheless. I have Sarah Gon, who's our chief editor of the Daily Friend, of course. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Susan.
Hello. And we of course have Mr. Ian Crookshanks, who's the chief economist at the Center of Risk Analysis. Ian, good morning.
Good morning, and good to be with you.
Excellento. Guys, we are going to hop straight into this one. We have such an exciting topic today. Good news for a change, I suppose, in the way of, and I'll begin with you, Ian, on this one. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Now, gobbledygook, I know it sounds to most of us, but essentially what it is opening up our borders across the, or to an extent, opening up our borders to trade across the African continent. 25 countries, is it, that have signed this agreement?
Yes, it's 27, so that was close.
Yep.
Out of 55 countries, so half have signed up. What have they signed up for? To do something about rectifying the fact that 17% of exports from African countries go outside Africa. If we were in Asia, that number would be 59%. If we were in the EU, that number would be 69%. And that is the potential of intra-continental trade that could be done. We're not getting there at all. Why not? Well, this is something that the Continental Free Trade Agreement is going to try and rectify. And where do they have to start? Sounds like something close to home. Bureaucracy and corruption. This is what they give as the main sticking points. Something can be done about that. A little bit of effort in seeing that your transport costs on your exports could come down considerably.
Absolutely.
There's a good start.
And let me just quickly interject here because, maybe the scale is something a lot of us might not understand. We just think, another agreement by politicians, blah, blah, blah. But really, this is such a wonderful opportunity for entrepreneurs across the continent to access what is in excess, I think now, of 1.2 billion Africans on this continent, the second largest population in the world. I mean, Asia being the largest, of course. If you are reducing barriers to trade, you obviously, Ian, and I'll come back to you on this one, and we'll get to you now, Sarah. If you're reducing barriers to trade so that the truck that leaves Durban port with goods, or Durban Industria with goods, and has to go to Lusaka, if it can make it to Lusaka with less hindrance, less bureaucrats essentially at each border trying to extract a bribe because of the bureaucratic power they're given essentially by the state, if you can have less of that, obviously you then have more of trade.
Absolutely, and let's make sure the truck gets there.
Yeah.
We just have to look, starting in South Africa, the threats that there are to the movement of goods along our national roads is huge. We have got to have a continental policing force that can say there's nothing more important than the movement of goods. That's even more important than the movement of people, because that movement of goods can bring sustenance and a future to a huge number of people.
Well, I suppose just as we extract this topic, and sorry, I'll bring you in here, just on a broader conceptual level, a lot of what happens in terms of migration patterns across the continent are because of that. Someone living in Burkina Faso or, Zimbabwe, who has such little opportunity in their home country because there's no trade, there's very little in the way of open and free markets. And high poverty levels, then feels the need to leave their country, to come to South Africa, to go to Nigeria, the sort of bigger African economies. But now if you're opening up trade and trade corridors where there is better alignment between governments to improve on infrastructure so that the trucks can make it through, we spend maybe perhaps more on better infrastructure, like a good railway network, airports that can handle cargo and freight, et cetera, you suddenly would have industries develop in smaller countries that maybe have a competitive advantage around labor prices, for example, being able to compete, employ their own people, and raise living standards across Africa. Sarah?
I hate to be the realist. What I'm concerned about is that there is so much disparity between the different countries in terms of development, wealth, even health. Unlike, say, the European Union or a number of the Asian groupings, where you've got a relative similarity, and so to cooperate on the development of infrastructure, which is crucial, is obviously it's always expensive, but it has a certain level of fluidity. The problem in Africa is we've got the roads, we've got badly operating ports, but which is a crime virtually. But we have the roads, we have the vehicles, but you very quickly you get into countries where the roads are so poor, or there's so little infrastructure that the time it takes is going to impact on the value of the trade. And I'm worried about whether it's realistic given those constraints and the fact that you have a lot of countries who have hugely corrupt. To reverse corruption is terribly difficult. So the question is, for me, is what that agreement offers to the leadership that has the control to actually go this route and not to stay in their sort of cozy rent-seeking way.
Fiefdoms at times. Ian, I'll bring you in just now, but I want to provide maybe the opposite view of this, and I'll let you sort of evaluate both.
No, I'm the voice of doom.
I'm positive because now you have a situation where you are, and again, one has to look at the agreement in the finer details and also how it will be fleshed out between the various countries. But in any event, I'm going to work on this assumption. I'm more encouraged at the fact that we're removing ever increasingly more reasons to have bureaucrats in the way of trade, in the way of markets, so that the average African, wherever he or she is, whether it's in a dusty village in Malawi, a sand dune in Cape Town, my famous example, I'm sure people will be like, what? There's that sand dune guy on Cape Town. Essentially, wherever on the continent, has the opportunity to say, hey, I've got an idea, small as it may be, to produce something, and here's this network that's been created now where I can trade in two ways. I have cheaper access to stuff coming into my country because it's coming in a little easier now. So that piece of equipment from South Africa or that piece of equipment from Germany, right, wherever, that I needed to build my little invention becomes cheaper to do, easier to do. Or alternatively, I've built something, I think it has a market. Here's this wonderful trade route that's being developed. I'm going to put my my equipment on this so that it reaches a bigger market. I'm more optimistic. Ian, should I be?
Yes, there's a two-way benefit. We've been looking at it primarily and saying, what's in it for us? What's in it for South Africa? Hey, why should the rest of the world want to come here and trade? Because what's in it for them? A market of 1.3 billion potential consumers. Yes, many of them don't have much to spend. But think if we can increase this trade, if we can increase these, improve these corridors of trading potential along the main arterials, then we have a chance of benefiting both by the buyer, the seller, and the buyer on that side and the seller on this side. Why aren't we doing more in beneficiation? What do we do best of all? Dig stuff out the ground and sell it as is. Hey, we had at one stage the biggest in the world reserves of gold and platinum and diamonds, but we haven't got a jewelry industry. This could give us the chance to move goods along these corridors, and it would also give the foreign buyers of high-cost items the opportunity to get closer to the source of these sort of goods and help intercontinental trade, not just intra-continental trade.
Ian, you make a very powerful point, and I want us to flesh it out just very briefly. A good friend of the show and of the Big Liberty show, Piake Gamini, who works at the Free Market Foundation, wrote a piece recently about how the Rwandans have taken over, have basically passed South Africa in terms of becoming the investment destination on the continent. And he makes some very powerful points in the piece where he argues, look, it's essentially the liberalization of their economy, opening up their borders to trade, and essentially allowing a culture of entrepreneurship, investment, and the protection of property rights in particular that have seen Rwanda surpass us relatively easy. And that's the story of South Africa, isn't it, at the moment? We're being surpassed. I mean, Nigeria surpassed us as being the largest economy on the continent now. And I'll get to you just now, Ian, but what I really wanted to ask is this. South Africa is clearly not you see, we South Africans have this weird exceptionalism. We sort of see ourselves as being the be-all, end-all on the African continent, but that's not really true.
Not
I
anymore.
think we have a new generation of African entrepreneurs across the continent who's rising up, and often even despite where they live, right? Like the really poor infrastructure, the even maybe sort of remnants of war in some cases, but despite all of that, they're innovating. They're seeking markets. And for me, this trade agreement, this free trade agreement, will make it easier for that individual to be able to tap into some opportunities even here in South Africa. and vice versa with them. Ian, this is what I'm going to bring you in. Do South Africans need to catch up with the, let's call it mentality, or the way of looking at markets and entrepreneurship that seemingly the rest of Africa seems to get, right? The idea that you build something from the ground up, you bring in foreign investment not as a tool to manipulate politically, but as a real investment. Set up infrastructure, give us jobs, let people, ordinary people, get income. From that income, they build savings. From those savings, they buy options. Do you think this free trade agreement is a beginning, a good first step that maybe will begin to shape and change the way we view the rest of the continent?
Absolutely. You mentioned Rwanda, spent some emphasis on that. What have they done? You've said property rights. They protect property rights. We don't. This means that a capitalist coming here to South Africa is unsure of his ability to service and to gain from the capital that he's invested, because the rules keep changing, the goalposts keep moving. That's poor government policy. Electricity, look at Eskom. We really have a disaster there. To run any manufacturing or any commercial operation is involved in the building or improvement of things, you've got to have a cost-effective, reliable electricity supply. We can't do that. And thirdly, we've got to have a labour force that understands. Yes, we'd like to pay them more, but they've got to remember that straight line between productivity and reward. Remember, it's better to be paid a little than not to be paid at all.
That's right.
This is what Rwanda and other more centrally located African countries are aiming at. And if we have this corridor of through the continent, stimulating demand, sourcing supply, then we're likely to have a benefit to all along that route, and to those outside Africa who would look at South Africa as a more attractive investment trading destination.
It's quite funny, because I mean, South Africa is going literally the opposite way that this trade agreement suggests we should be going, and which most of us suggest we should be going.
Absolutely.
So it'll be interesting to see to what extent the government understands this and starts to change direction. And I was listening just last night on radio to a guy talking about the fact that the Minister of Small Business, whoever that may be now, but the previous minister had agreed to look at, and they had a commission looking at removal of red tape.
Yeah.
And he said that the consequences of this commission would be known at the end of this year, I think it was. It's been 3 years in the making. Maybe I'm being naive, but surely they do need to talk to the private sector, but remove red tape. Remove the red tape.
Yeah.
Kind of just remove a whole lot of red tape. This there's almost this fear of taking any real decision. I mean, I don't know whether it's taking it or being responsible for it that's the crisis.
Well, we also need to be frank here in terms of just being honest about the politics of South Africa. I mean, if you have politicians who are so immersed in socialist rhetoric, in the language of a national democratic revolution, where essentially politicians, the state, becomes a more overbearing and controlling feature of all aspects of society, from the economy, our personal lives, etc., then of course those individuals wouldn't have an incentive, to liberalize or free up anything part of the economy, because they see themselves, don't they, as the arbiters of all things that happen in a society.
It's not just yes, it's exactly that. But what's really weird is that the continent in general, I'm speaking broadly, is moving in the direction of a free trade environment, and I think the ANC government is looking at South African politically in terms of the utopian Marxist state, the National Democratic Revolution, and it's I dare say cloud cuckoo land, because it's just not the way the rest of the world is either works or is moving towards. And I wonder whether it isn't part of that sort of almost South African psychosis of, you mentioned, of exceptionalism, that somehow we fought the great struggle against apartheid, we won. I mean, we can go into that in much greater detail, and therefore we can create the future we envisage. But we actually can't, because that's not where the future is.
Ian, as a last gasp on this, and I'll bring you in, don't worry.
He's going to talk a lot first.
I just want to sort of bring in another topic, and then I'll let everybody have final thoughts on this discussion. If South Africa is to prosper, if South Africa is to succeed, indeed endure, then we have to begin to get certain things right, and reform agenda which leans on the side of liberty, freeing up markets and opening up trade is much more necessary than any sort of delusions that our body politic have around, the socialist dystopia. And so I'm going to preface the question to you. As you respond, give me the top 3 things we need to do as South Africans in looking forward to this free trade agreement, right? In terms of how we can also benefit from it. Top 3 things we need to do, and what the African continent needs to do in order to raise living standards, to raise incomes, and become a middle class, even prosperous and wealthy continent.
First of all, Sarah just said, government has been looking at this removal of bureaucracy in some areas for 3 years. There is bureaucracy gone crazy. It's gone mad. So it must start in that sort of way. What we have to say is the first requirement is an acceptance by government that the private sector should be a partner, can bring expertise, can bring capital, can source these from the world if needs be because of their connections, and that we are no longer in the days of the Rainbow Nation where we were favoured customers for whatever it is we wanted. We are not. We are not an investment-friendly destination. So the first thing is to work on that. Security of assets, security of electricity supply, and reality by our labour force. There are my 3 major requirements.
Sorry, final thoughts on this?
I had one which I've now suddenly forgotten. But I think the point is this, and this is the politics is the art of the possible, and what I think we need to try and get across is the fact that if the freedom that Shoprite Checkers has to employ more people, open more stores, go through the continent is good for the economy. The fact that the government has made that possible is what voters will notice. They're not going to worry about whether it was Anglo-American or the Spaza shop or Shoprite Checkers. They're going to see, have their lives improved in the period that the government loosened control? If they have, then they'll thank the government for it, because the government will have been seen to have provided, in the broad sense, this better economy. And until the government actually understands that it stands to benefit in the eyes of the people by allowing the people to do what is needed to be done, we're going to be hamstrung.
All right, guys, let's move on. Second issue I wanted us to chat about is one which really captured my imagination yesterday, and I did a vlog on this one. For those who watch the Big Liberty Show, just check out vlog 12, where I talk about this news piece, right, on online. Its heading is "Armed Homeowners Kill 4 Assailants," and they basically chronicle 2 events. 2 individuals who shot and killed 2 assailants in each incident. In the one incident in Middelburg, in Mpumalanga, killed 2 and shot and injured the other 2, who then went to hospital and then were apprehended by the police. But at the center of this issue is a broader topic in this country around crime. The state itself has essentially admitted, the police force that is, the police service, if I call it the police force, we're not in apartheid anymore.
Should be a force.
Anyway, the South African Police Service, the top cop in the country, appears before Parliament, looks parliamentarians square in the face and says, listen, our mandate is too stretched. Essentially admitting to a population of people who already knew this, that SAPS just cannot put a lid on the crime situation in this country, which ever increasingly is becoming more violent, and ordinary people are facing hardened, at times even organized criminals who are very, very violent in terms of their threats to our life, liberty, and property in this country. Now, let me bring it in. Here's this news piece suggesting that South Africans, are beginning to fight back. They're tired of being victims and actually will shoot back at criminals. Now, my vlog, I was unequivocal in saying kudos to that. I think anybody who recognizes that the police is not your first responder anymore, that you are your own first responder, should take responsibility for their own safety and security and that of their families. But there's a broader discussion here to be had, isn't there, in terms of the state's failure just to protect life and property. Sarah?
Well, it's part of the sort of, let me call it the moral disintegration of the state. Because if the government has one role to perform, it's to keep it's citizens safe.
Absolutely.
The citizens can pretty much get on the although now citizens keep themselves safe either through their own gun ownership or through private security entities.
Absolutely.
And there seems to be sort of schizophrenia. They've admitted that they can't cope. On the other hand, I think Dele said that the scenario where 13 people killed over the weekend in Philippi, the police have control. They don't.
Can't.
I mean, they can't have control, and we don't believe they have control because our eyes tell us that they don't have control. Crime in this country is extremely violent. People make sort of snarky comments about sort of our high walls and our electric fences. But the problem is you respond to what you're experiencing.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter how liberal or non-liberal your politics may be. And I think it seems to me that what has to be, again, it's the politics being the art of the possible. And it's about perhaps changing your relationship between the private and the public sector, because the private sector is well manned in private security companies.
I mean, for every one police officer, there's 5 private security officers.
That's
That tells you a
where
story.
the police
Take advantage of the fact that exists and the people are paying for it. You know, make their lives easier. The other thing, of course, is the fact that policing is a national competence, and hence you get the crisis that you've got in the Western Cape, where the Western Cape wants to be able to do a whole lot of things that it knows the turf it's trying to manage, and you have National, which is a different party, querying their pitch. And then, of course, there's the final thing, and that's the sort of equivalent of gun control in terms of communities taking things into their own hands, catching people, burning them, killing them, whatever you do. You can repeatedly say how horrific it is and people shouldn't take law into their own hands. It's a sign of desperation. So they've got to think out of the box, but there's not much. They don't have to go far out of the box to come up with solutions. They've just got to be prepared not to own the solution, the supposed solution to every problem.
Ian, there is a big impact that crime has on the economy. And again, when I talk about the economy, not just at a macro level. The homeowner who must now cough out extra bits of their income in order to build the higher walls. I mean, a lot of the construction happening in my neighborhood in Johannesburg, and I won't name which neighborhood it is, just in case you lefties are there to protest me. But a lot of the construction I'm seeing happening isn't the expansion of a home, an extra room, or nice tiles or extra bit of paint. No, it's raising walls from having a 3-meter wall with the barbed wire, with the broken shards of glass that we now use as spiking, the security camera, the electric fencing, to becoming a 6-meter wall with all of those trappings. What is the impact on the economy essentially when you have a high crime level and a violent crime, such violent crime, in a country like ours?
There's a considerable impact. Remember, the major stimulus, the major sphere of activity in our economy used to be that over 60% of all activity came from consumer spending. So what are we doing now with the cost of electricity and security and everything else, all the other basic services? There's less left over to spend within the economy, the free spend, and that means that the economy slows down. It doesn't get close to its potential growth rate. The potential growth rate in our economy is close to 2%, maybe marginally below that. But we're not going to make 1% this year if we make anything positive in growth. And that just says, it's slowing down the advance that we could all make in the provision of jobs and services and employment and being able to afford a meal a day.
And we were chatting about this, in another forum on Monday. We were saying, it also comes down to the entrepreneur. If a spaza shop owner in a township is robbed continuously by the local thugs and the police don't play their role. If a farmer loses stock, his fence is damaged or stolen, his cows or his livestock is pilfered and stolen. You now have incidences where harvesters are coming onto farmers' plots to steal crops, and if the state isn't responding, there is a major impact on the economy when entrepreneurs, the risk taker, the investor says, stuff it, I'm not investing in South Africa, whether small or big, local or foreign. If they say, stuff it, we're not investing, there's an impact on jobs, isn't there?
Absolutely. That is going back to what we started with saying. We become increasingly a globally unattractive investment destination, whether it's manufacturing or agriculture or wherever it is. There's just no security of assets, no security of the ability to mobilize those assets, and therefore we slow down the economy even more if that is possible. So I think that it's a very real threat, and there should be more awareness of it, and government needs to wake up and see where the priorities are.
Can I mention a very graphic example that sort of mixes the things we've been talking about, both crime, trade unionism, etc. We knew of a company that had been in existence for decades. Bronkhorstspruit area employs 2,000 people. Trade union unionizes one half, and an opposing union tries to come in on the other half. So you have union tension. Police can't handle it, gets violent constantly. They're constantly going to court for interdicts to stop it. And eventually somebody shoots one of the union leaders dead. Some of the workers they say the management shot the worker dead, and they came very close to killing the management. And then one day the management just literally locked the door, gave the keys to one of the union leaders and said, it's all yours. And of course, by the end of the week, there was nothing. So 2,000 people times the number of dependents they had, plus the entrepreneurs who created the industry and who trained people as well, because very much an artisanal industry. It's gone.
That's it. Poof. Guys, as we look to conclude, I'm really fascinated by the lack of self-awareness by politicians on this. And maybe it's because they wake up and then immediately they're surrounded by 4 armed police officers who are personal bodyguards. But that's not the reality for ordinary South Africans. Ordinary South Africans are spending more to protect themselves, are living less, if I can call it that, in order to sort of stay in bubbles of security. We released a report as the Institute of Race Relations earlier in the year called The Broken Blue Line 3. And we made some recommendations in that in that report as to how we can begin to address this, including the breakdown between the community and police. One of them, for example, which I support, and I'll put it to you guys very briefly, is those individuals who are spending money on their personal security, upgrading their homes' security, for example, burglar bars, raising your fence, electric fencing. There should be a tax rebate for that, because ultimately they're doing something which should have been the function of the state. Community neighborhood watches should be more empowered so that people can patrol their own communities, be accountable essentially for their own families and communities. Are these not private security? For example, should be given more powers. I think
I agree.
To be able to police communities more effectively, obviously with accountability.
Sure.
And speaking about accountability, one of the big suggestions we made was that a community should be able to know who their local station commander is, because a lot of people don't. And part of that is allowing them, giving them the power to vote in their local station commander. For example, around the time of local government elections, which right now will be in the next 2 years or so that either a community can vote them in, or B, a community policing forum can have powers to do that. Quick thoughts on this, guys, as we wrap up.
I think, actually, I think there's a strange solution to part of it, and that is the fact that the public sector, people who in the public sector have almost no risk of losing their jobs. Unlike the private sector, which operates in the way that if retrenchments need to be made or somebody needs to be fired for misconduct, they are. I suspect part of the problem, and that you see with a sort of lackadaisical response often of the police on the ground or nurses, etc., partly is because there's no fear, very little fear that they could lose their job for not doing their job. And that, I think, it reflects a preparedness by management to make the hard decisions, which are the logical decisions. Because I know someone who was in such a policing forum, a neighborhood policing forum, and it worked up to a point. But as soon as, for example, the commander of the station changed, if the attitude changed, the whole set of responses changed, and it sort of fell apart and had to be recreated.
Ian, when it comes to communities and their spending on their safety, I'm advocating concentrated benefits insofar as a community being able to say, concentrated benefit dispersed costs. So each community member can pay something towards the safety and security of their community. What do you think about that?
We are paying something already. No, we're not paying something. We're paying a great deal in the cost of defence, personal defence, the freedom of movement. This is one of the big problems that the ANC itself was fighting for, to allow the freedom of movement and everything that went with that. By confining us in boxes behind these hide walls and barbed wire and other defense systems, they're taking that away again. And who is taking it away? Those that are not enforcing the rule of law.
Absolutely.
And that's why there needs to be a lot more effort there. And if there's no fear of retribution, then we have to say we've got to increase that retribution. I think that we've got to say think very clearly about what sorry.
Well, the level of policing essentially needs to catch up with essentially the more craftiness of our criminals. Sarah, very briefly.
Here's the conspiracy theory of doom, and that is the fact that the wonder whether the government isn't actually trying to essentially keep control of safety to an extent that it actually it removes guns from civil society and leaves guns entirely in the hands of the state.
And criminals.
And therefore the state then has the power to become something much more authoritarian.
Well, hopefully we'll have
a bit much for a Wednesday.
Lovely conspiracy theory. Hopefully we'll have some writing on that on the Daily Friend. Guys, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really, really wonderful. And thank you for watching. I think we ended off on a nice one there where I'm hoping there will be something on the Daily Friend website. Remember, you can find all our writing and analysis on the Daily Friend website, dailyfriend.co.za. News, opinion, links to the Big Liberty Show, everything that we do and produce is on there. And speaking about our producing it, we need your help and support to make sure that the content keeps pumping out. You can support us, of course, by becoming a friend of the IRR. That's as simple as you SMSing your name to 32823. An SMS will cost you R1. Terms and conditions do apply. If you don't like SMSs, you prefer something a little more savvy and online, no worries. Find us at irr.org.za/join. And you can sign up a monthly debit order of between 70 and 90 Rand on there. Guys, remember to look out for the Daily Friend, which comes out, the show that is, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And of course, our other shows on here, including the Big Liberty Show. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on Friday.